Alright folks, part 2 is finally here. Very excited this is done. I thought for sure this was going to take longer, but I was very surprised at how cheap and easy this was to make. And I know what you're thinking, this looks nothing like a traditional arcade machine, and that's okay. The purpose of this video is to get you started on building something you can easily design and build yourself. What you make does not have to look like this. I made mine like this because I just don't have the room for something bigger, but you can just as easily make this look more traditional or completely off the wall. It's totally up to you. Now I'm going to be doing this video a little differently as well, where I showcase the end product first and break it up into small segments that are easy to digest. If you like the format, let me know in the comments, but to start things off, I'm actually going to touch on something I missed in part 1, which are the speakers and how to set them up. Now if you're plugging this into a TV via the HDMI cord, you don't need to do anything. The audio travels through the HDMI automatically, but if you're like me and you're using a computer monitor through a VGA and adapter, you'll need external speakers that plug into the 3.5mm jack, which also requires changing the settings in the menu, which I'll show you here in a minute. The speakers can honestly be any type or size too, just as long as they have the standard 3.5mm audio jack that allows you to plug it into things like a phone, computer, or an R case and RPI. Alright, so your speakers are plugged in, they're turned on, the RPI is powered up. All you need now is a USB keyboard and to configure it. All you need to do here is hit start on your controls, go down to where it says configure input, press A, yes, you'd like to configure, and then on your keyboard, press any key to start. It's going to recognize it. All you need here are your up, down, left, right. I'm using the enter key as start, the shift key as select, doesn't really matter. Your A as your A button and your B as your B button, and then I'm just going to skip the rest. So your keyboard is configured. All you got to do here is press B to exit that screen, and now you're going to want to scroll over, if it's not already there, to the RetroPie and press A. Your first option is audio. You're going to press A again to open that. And the reason I configured the keyboard is because this next screen just does not like the arcade controls for some reason, but that's okay because we have a keyboard, and all you need to do here is scroll down to option 2 where it says headphones 3.5mm jack and press start, and then press start again. And then once this screen comes back, just press B to exit it and you should be good to go. Now that the audio is taken care of, let's begin the build by starting with the sides, which is pretty simple. I'm just going to be using 2 of these 1 foot by 6 foot melamine boards that are 3/4 of an inch thick. You can also cut these from a sheet of ply or any material of your choosing, just to make sure it's as thick as the edge banding or T-molding that you'll put on the edge, which I'll touch on in a little bit. So once I have my boards, I'm going to be cutting the tops and bottoms off at a 10-degree angle to give it this nice sleek angled look. No measurements here, I'm just going to be making the cuts as close to the existing edge as possible so I can retain as much of the height. I'm also going to be stacking the boards and making the last cut at the same time to make sure that they are identical height. So an added bonus to using these melamine covered boards is that they already come with edge banding on one side, so if you don't have a router to cut a slot for T-molding, you can simply mount these in the reverse way that I'm currently mounting them, or just buy the iron-on edge banding to put on whatever you're using. But in my case, I purchased 20 feet of this sweet chrome molding, so my next step is to use a special slot cutter just like this one in my router to create a groove for the strip to wedge into. Once that's complete, I'm going to be painting what will be these inside edges with matte black paint to match the vinyl I'll be adhering later on. This is not an easy spot to adhere vinyl, so I'm just going to use some paint. I'm also going to be painting the edges where the T-molding will go, just in case it doesn't fully cover the white pieces in the melamine or the edges of the particle board. After that dries, I'm going to be taking these down to my workshop and attach them to the control board I made in part 1. And to help out, I'm going to clamp one side to my workbench and find an ideal height for the controls, which is 38 inches from the bottom. And once I've done that, I'll mark it and use a level to make sure it's even. Luckily for this project, I also have my friend over to help out. He's going to hold it in place while I first tack it together with a brad nailer to make sure it doesn't move while I drive in a few of the screws. Once that's in place, I'll do the same for the other side. And to help ensure it's consistent, I cut out a piece of paper the same size as the overhang and placed a level on the controls, and again, used a couple brad nails to hold it in place while I drive in the screws. You can now see why I left this extra bit of wood coming out the back in part 1. I wasn't sure how much I needed, and it's always good to have extra, so at any point feel free to trim this off. So next step will be creating the base. This will be done by taking just one 8-foot long 2x4 and cutting two pieces that will be the same width as the controls, which is 24 inches, and then using what's left to create the sides, which leaves me with a box that's 24 inches wide and 22 inches long. And just like with the controls, I'm going to be joining these together using miter joints since I'm going to be painting this to match. And what's nice about using this method is there's little to no waste left over when you're done. And to make this look a little cleaner, I'm going to be squaring off the edges with my table saw, but this step is completely optional. Now that my boards are good, I'm going to be applying some wood glue and clamp them together with a band clamp, but honestly, this is just a ratchet strap. Either one works just fine. While that dries, I'm going to grab the leftover piece of ply that I actually used for the control board in part 1 and then glue and nail it to the top of the base frame. Make sure you drive in plenty of nails and use plenty of glue because believe it or not, the entire weight of the cabinet will be resting on this board. Not directly, but indirectly through the casters I'll be applying later on to the bottom side of this, which you'll see in a little bit. You'll also start to notice why I made the controls 24 inches wide because it's a pretty standard board size, which makes things a lot easier. I didn't even have to make a cut on this piece. Once the glue is set, just patch any holes and imperfections you find and sand it smooth and paint it the same way I showed in part 1 so it's consistent and it matches. Now you saw at the beginning when I rolled this into place that it obviously has casters. So to add those onto a thin ply like this, I'm going to use some scrap wood to place the casters onto. Also be sure to move the casters away from the side so it's able to swivel the whole way around. And if your screws don't go into the ply, that's totally fine. Just having glue there will hold it in place because gravity will do all the work for you. I actually like this setup a lot and I might have to use it on another project because it's these nice heavy duty casters but it's tucked away so it appears as if the cabinet is floating. Next, I'm just going to prop the top portion up a little bit, which keeps it from scraping the ground when moving, and then slide the base in, making sure the nice side is sticking out the back and the not so nice side facing the front. I'm also going to be using 4 screws on either end, making sure they aren't too long because they can potentially stick into the casters, keeping them from rolling properly. Next, I'm going to take another 8-foot long 2x4 and cut 2 boards at 24 inches wide and cut the leftover piece perfectly in half. With these 4 pieces, I'm going to make a simple frame I'll be attaching to the inside to give the structure more rigidity. And no fancy joints needed here either, just going to glue and screw the pieces together. Now that the structure is self-standing and stable, I can start working on this bottom kick plate. All you need to do here is grab a 24 by 48 inch panel of either MDF or ply and trim it to the correct height that allows it to sit below the controls while not dragging on the ground. Ideally, this should sit above the ground the same height as the side does. Now in my case, it's going to be 38 inches long, and since everything is at standard 24 inches wide, I'll only need to make one cut to adjust the height. And attach it, I'll just grab a couple pieces of scrap wood and stick it on the edges, which gives me a little bit bigger of a target when I drive in the brad nails from the outside of the cabinet. If you're a good shot, you don't need these, but I definitely recommend them. So now I'm going to start applying some very inexpensive black vinyl. This can be bought pretty much anywhere for very cheap, and it's actually just a placeholder until at a later date when I could get a much better design professionally printed on much nicer vinyl. But I didn't want to waste any more time getting this done, and this will definitely do for now. Once that's done, I'll slide it into place using the guide to make sure it's consistent on both sides, and make sure you keep that guide because you'll need it for the top section as well. And then I'm just going to shoot in a few of the brad nails into those pieces of scrap wood to hold it in place.
Alright, well, unfortunately that is it for part 2, but check it out, part 3 is already here. Go check it out. And it's on my face, isn't it? Yep. Well, enjoy. Have a good time. I'm not needed anymore. Nobody cares about part 2. It's old news. Everyone's moved on. Everyone's on part 3 now. Goodbye.